this is one of the best approaches I've seen for understanding interpretability inside these large language models or transformers. And I'll let kind of Harrison start with kind of the material here, and then we'll hop directly into the paper.
Cool. Thanks for coming, everybody. What I was thinking I would do with these first few slides is to just break it down a little bit so we're all on the same page as to the bigger ideas of the paper before we dive in. So I think Jason probably set it up quite well already. Like, the problem is you have these really large neural networks. Now we're talking about transformers, LLMs.
Can you click the slideshow button, Harrison?
Oh, yeah. 1 second. Can everyone see my screen? Yeah. Okay. So the problem is we don't know exactly what's happening there. And why do we care? Well, if we have a mechanistic way of interpreting these models, we have a better way of steering them, controlling them with safety, alignment. Usually the analogy I give is, if we have cars today, if you're a mechanic, you don't just want to know if you press the gas pedal, the car goes. You kind of want to have some understanding of the mechanistic reasons as to why when you press the gas pedal, it goes, so you can fix the car when it breaks or even make improvements to it. So that's the general motivation behind why we want to do this. So what does the paper mean by monosemanticity? I think the easiest way to think about it is just, you look at this meme, that's the existential risk neurons, just turn it off and you're safe from us. So, like, why is it funny? Well, I think it's funny because we all intuitively probably get that a single neuron doesn't encode these human level meaningful features. And in the first part of the paper, they say that the most natural unit is the neuron, but it's probably not the unit we want to be looking at for human understanding. But because we're humans, we do want some unit that represents a monosemantic, like a singular aspect of reality. Maybe it's, the likelihood that a text is Arabic or base 64. That is monosemantic. That's what the paper sets out to try and find. So with that being said, we're going to take just a small detour to dive into what they mean by dictionary learning and the specific technique of dictionary learning they use.
So one thing I would notice on the monos, like the single neuron stuff, OpenAI put out a paper. I think we did a paper reading on it, which was trying to use an LLM to understand the neurons, individual neurons within an LLM. And I just think, I deeply think that the direction they're going here, which is understanding really vectors of neurons, call it, embeddings within the transformer or the layer, like the way in which things learn, it makes a really good case that it's just not individual neurons, not going to map to a single idea. As easy as it sounds like for us, if that was the case, it would be great, it'd be easy, but it's just not how these models are trained or learned. The multiple neurons work together to create a vector and embedding. And those look to represent things that can be mapped to things that we might interpret as a human, which is what the paper does.
Totally. And Jason, I think you had a great point before about, like, it's a very human thing to want a single neuron to mean something because it's something we can mechanically see and it's something we can understand easily. But that's, totally not the case. The authors here make the case that many neurons are polysemantic. And, all that means is you can show it a token that's part of Arabic and another token that's numbers or English, and the same neuron will fire and might fire intensely. So there's no way neurons are monosemantic, being singular things. So, but we still need some unit to understand these features to begin to reason about it. And so going back to the brief detour here, towards monosemanticity using dictionary learning, the specific technique they will be using here is something called an autoencoder. And what you have here is just a super basic example of what an autoencoder neural network will look like. Typically, in these cases, the input layer, the loss function is so that you're training the identity function, so the input and output is the same. The trick is that in the hidden layer, you typically have a small amount of neurons. And what you're doing is you're training the network to find a compressed encoding of what's going on in the input. Anything you want to add here, Jason?
No, I mean, I'm going to hit on some ideas later
Okay,
on
cool.
autoencoder stuff, but I mean, that's exactly it. It's trying to discover, features that represent, the whatever you're looking at internally.
Yep. And so in the problem set of the paper is the authors take a simple transformer with a single layer MLP, multi-layer perceptron, and train an autoencoder on the activations of the neurons of that feed-forward network. So the main meats and potatoes of the paper just goes on in the boxes that are orange that you see. And in the paper, it says, well, the autoencoder is sparse and overcomplete. That's actually two very important details. If we zoom in, I can show you exactly what they mean.
If you go back one second, one thing I want to hint is sometimes I feel like the word features on the right can be kind of confusing because features are used so often in the network. So on the left, what you have are activations. Really, what are the neuron activations on the left, and on what you have on the right are kind of like what we're going to find is human discernible features or dictionary basis features that describe human-like things. So we're mapping from a vector and embedding within the transformer layer to a set of human discernible dictionary features.
Exactly. And I think it is confusing because it's a bit circular. I think and the authors put it in quotes here, right? The features here are what the authors hope to recover as these like monosemantic interpretable units.
Yep.
You're exactly right. And just if you zoom in a little more, you can just imagine that they're attaching weights from these neurons to the hidden layer of that autoencoder. And now the novel thing between what the authors are doing here versus the autoencoder here is that bottleneck is overcomplete. What that means is instead of trying to compress information, they're actually trying to pull it way out, increase the dimensionality of it. So you can see in this example here, just suppose that there's a toy feed-forward network here with 2 neurons. They're going to expand it to 5, something greater. And in reality, it's 512 to 131,000. You can see it in the graph on the left. So it's overcomplete in that sense. And it's sparse. So during training, what they force the network to do is almost that these features are one-hot encoded. So back to that monosemanticity thing is what they hope is something like whenever these are activated, you only get feature 1 that's activated from neuron 1 and 2, or feature 3, 4, 5, or so on. And so that's how they coerce this. Again, the authors have features in quotes because they don't know if they're going to recover features from it. But that was one way of getting at it.
And I think it's a good point. Now, it's not exactly one hot encoded. They're just trying to find a sparse mapping. So a handful or a small number of these features can work together. But exactly that. It's a handful of the features actually describe the set of activations. Yeah.
Okay, so then this is the really like interesting part of the paper. Again, we'll go into the details after. But so in this sort of setup, assuming that we recover from these sparse features in the autoencoder will semantically map to something, well, what is a feature? Like, if you really ask rigorously mathematically, what is a feature? And I'm going to try and explain this with a picture behind some of the technical jargon here. Empirical evidence suggesting that neural networks have interpretable linear directions in activation space. So going back to the example here, if you have these neurons that are firing based on some tokens, and say you are dealing with a network with 3 neurons, and if you plot each of these points in space, it's 3D space, and now just imagine a case where what you're plotting turns out to be, it looks like a box or something like that. Imagine you have like a 3 neuron MLP for a cat picture like classifier. And so these points are being plotted on the square. What the authors are saying is that what is actually a feature is the basis vectors that span this vector space. And so you can reframe your question as, well, every feature is a basis vector. And so maybe cat image 33 that is somewhere on that box is cuteness plus fluffy plus whiskers. And moreover, you can combine these basis vectors as to create more complex features. And I think that's a very interesting and insightful reframing of what a feature is. It's not a singular neuron, it's a direction of points in activation space. And it's just a fascinating sort of geometric way to look at what's happening in these neural networks. I have one more down to earth example, but Jason, anything you wanted to add to that?
No, I mean, I'm going to add a little bit more around, like, I think it's pretty clear. Some of us have been applying like UMAP to transformer embeddings for quite a while from, say, llama models. And I think it's clear to us who've been doing that, that there's some topology that, there's structures in that space that map out, structures in that space that map out like those transformers are learning ideas, and those ideas are represented by topologies that are learned in that space. And that's kind of what you're essentially doing here, except you're mapping it to a set of dictionaries, and the dictionaries are these basis vectors. And so I think that, fast forward a couple of years here, there's going to, I just think there's a massive amount of interesting work to be done on how topologies mapped out by embeddings or the vectors within transformers map to concepts or ideas. And then there's a big thing they hinted in there, and we'll talk about a little bit about it, which is like, are these topologies that are learned model specific, or is these like, are there, like, if you compared multiple models trained on different data, would they learn the same topologies? And can you start to find similar basis vectors? So like, not basis vectors, but similar surfaces, and then these dictionaries represent the basis vectors, or, will you find similar ones as you look at lots of different models? So big idea, is information represented by topological structure, and is it common across different, totally different training runs for models? And they kind of hinted at it at the paper, but we'll kind of, I think it's a really big open idea.
And one last example for those of us, if vector spaces, basis vectors, subspaces, that's not part of your common, data vocabulary. I think this is just an even more simple example of what we're trying to illustrate. In the scatter plot, if y-axis is the activation of neuron 1, if x-axis is the activation of neuron 2, and each point is an example that you feed into the network that you get these activation intensities from, what the feature is a vector in some direction of that scatter plot. And that's it. It's not neuron 1, it's not neuron 2. It is the direction of some subset of these plots of data. And there can be infinitely many of them. There can be 5 of them, there can be 10 of them. And what you get back is just how much you scale up the autoencoder in the hidden layer. So just a fascinating way to look at it. And that I will hand it over to Jason for the rest of the paper.
So we'll hop in to kind of go through some of these, some of the sections here, and feel free to, throw out questions or ideas or thoughts, or, so the beginning kind of gives the background, which I think is, the problem setup and what they're going to do, what they're going to go through. I think there's, an amazing, if you haven't seen it, a really well done piece of research that includes like interactive analysis, and in the beginning they kind of do the summary results, which we've kind of talked about, which is it's clear you can use a sparse encoder to extract the basically features that represent human level ideas, the Arabic or the base 64 encoding or cat cuteness. And I think that's pretty, I think it's clear they did a really good job of actually showing that these can be extracted. They did really deep job, really kind of deep level research and well done research on showing those features probably do represent activations on data relative to those those things they're trying that they think the features are. There's relatively, I think there's some really interesting idea. I mean, I think there's really interesting ideas in how some of the features do work together, that they can actually explode the feature space into larger sizes, that you can tune the autoencoder. You can choose a smaller encoder, get less features, or you can get like more visibility by actually increasing the size and having things be more subtly represent different feature sets. I think we talked about this a lot, so I'm not going to go through it too much. One note is they did choose a very, very small transformer here. So it's one layer, like this is done on a very simple setup. And it was, but I do think like this approach, you're going to see applied to larger, deeper levels in your more traditional LLMs that you see. We talked a bit about the feature decomposition. So this is, this is kind of what they highlighted previously, something called dictionary learning, which is mapping a set of data and activations to a set of dictionary basis functions that might be overcomplete within within the space. So this DI, it represents really a direction of feature I. So you're thinking of it like, as you're thinking about this, the dictionary kind of basis functions represent those human readable and understandable things that make up your data. They kind of give the example of the problem, which is, if you imagine in this like this blown out space where maybe things aren't superimposed and they're kind of putting this hypothetical disentangled model, which also kind of represents the dictionary learning problem too, that you're trying to learn this like very large sparse matrix that represents your data in an expanded form, and disentangles what is your low dimensional essentially projection. And there's a couple questions here. Maybe I'll stop for a sec to see what those questions. Thinking of vector space terms, can this process be thought of as principal component analysis or singular value decomposition? Perhaps not exactly, but useful analogy. Yeah. So that's, I mean, if you look at like what dictionary learning is, it's kind of very very, very related to SVD. I think that SVD is more a general thing, where the one other constraint I think on the dictionary learning is the activation is supposed to be sparse across the dictionary terms. So it's like maybe a special form of some of this, but it's totally related to
Jason,
SVD.
there's another interest. I think there's an even more intuitive point here. Like totally sparsity thing is a thing, but in SVD, you're typically going from many dimensions and you're trying to, extract out the smaller amount of like lesser dimensions. And the interesting things from this paper came from when they took the inputs, which is 512 dimensions, to a higher dimension and maintain sparsity. And you won't be able to get that with SVD, but you could with this like autoencoder approach.
Yeah. Okay. So, but definitely related in terms of its matrix factorization of a matrix and trying to get a set of basis, two matrices that represent bases of the original one. So I would say related in that sense. How do you assign meaning to the basis factors of your new expanded feature space? Is a similar problem to general embeddings, at least in scaling down with UMAP, you might be able to visualize it and guess it. So this is a really good question, actually. So I think I want to go through the paper. I wasn't like, I kind of feel like it's a similar problem that we have in like UMAP or any of these things, where you end up with this you end up with a feature, or maybe a dictionary feature, but then this feature activates. So in this case, this dictionary value, this dictionary, which is a basis vector, activates for some set of your data. Maybe it's Arabic text. And you have the same problem in UMAP where you're kind of looking at this cluster of data and saying, okay, well, what does it represent? Well, I got to look through all the samples, and by the way, go look at what, come up with something. What we've done in our what we do with our software quite a bit is actually use GPT-4 to summarize a cluster of data. So I think it's a similar problem, which is you're kind of like looking at what is common across these and trying to come up with a summarization of it. But yeah, it's a great question. It's like a summarization problem for in UMAP, it's a cluster, and in this case, it's a dictionary activation on a set of examples.
Same approach that Others took with this too. They used GPT-4 to summarize some of them because
or probably Anthropic's Claude, but
sorry, yeah.
So and then the way I think of they are, so one comment here is the way I think of they're semantically similar but not exactly the same. One is deterministic, one isn't. Another way to look is you can't enforce sparsity constraints in SVD. That was okay. So we'll keep going. And I mean, it's a good point. Like, what makes a good decomposition? It's interpretable. The sparsity thing is kind of nice, in that it means that like there's kind of a well-defined meaning that for these that are activated, and it's not that many. The more you'd get, the less sparse you are, the more these would be less useful. The less useful these would be in helping understand the components that make up something. So why not use architectural approaches? So this was a question in the original paper, which is like, maybe, and I don't love this myself, but like why not force a architectural approach to a model that makes it understandable, instead of trying to understand what we built with in terms of kind of large language models and transformers. This always, I think they came to the pretty clear conclusion at the end of this that it's just not it's not going to work. You lose a lot in terms of by forcing, like, can we force a neuron to mean something one hot wise? And I think they found that like that it kills a lot in performance, and it's just I think you're giving up an incredible amount of how these models learn if you try to force it this direction. So that was my take, kind of my intuition going in, and probably what the conclusion they came to at the end of this. So then they came to kind of using sparse autoencoders to find good decompositions. And this definitely works. It looks like it works great. It looks like it works, I mean, really well given the data seen. To those of you who are kind of researchers, one thought I had as I looked at this, and this is kind of someone who wants a fun research project or a paper to write, was UMAP itself does mappings, and we use it all the time from from like a high dimensional topological space to a lower space that you can then cluster in. And one of the questions I had when looking at this is like, why use a sparse autoencoder? Why not do UMAP directly? And I've seen, and one is I do think that there's like some good scaling properties that maybe the autoencoder might have. But I think it's research that I'm interested in someone doing or seeing. I'm sure there'll be a paper and we'll cover it, but they kind of do and tackle similar issues, which is finding structure and surfaces and mapping those into distinct groups of things. In one case, you get this clear dictionary activation. In UMAP, you get in UMAP, you get 2D, 3D kind of space where you still have to cluster, but it's not that, it's someone should tackle and look at like going one direction versus another. On the sparse encoder side, this they like like Harrison said, it does, the goal is to go from like that 512 to more expanded space and over complete representation that's sparse of the data. They talk a little bit about the setup. I'm going to keep going fast because there's good visuals here that would be fun to go through. Okay. So anything else I'd add? I mean, I think we kind of went through the autocoders in the beginning, kind of hit on the sparsity idea. They do have some really amazing kind of exploring the data. So I don't know if you got to see, if you've looked at this, but they have some just amazing visualizations where you can kind of click on one of these and they'll give you an idea of like what this feature represents. And this is one of the this is feature, I think, A2 in this case. Pretty clear this is one of those DNA features they mentioned. So again, by kind of looking at its top activations, you take this group of data, you can kind of say what it is, or use Claude or GPT-4 to say what it is. And I mean, it's just clear in this case that I mean, but by looking at what it is, and there's quite a bit here in terms of in terms of like what it activates on, densities, positive, negatives. So it's I mean a pretty amazing piece of work. There's also versions where you can take this feature and look at like a piece of text and kind of look at like different components of the text and what kind of things, what top features activate for certain words within these. So like, computer here, you see the top activation in this, the top feature activation on this case is the auto-interpreted one. Name is like the neuron fires on proper nouns for technology and mobile apps. So there's a couple different ways of looking at these that they've put visualizations on, which are pretty awesome. Abilities to look at like, this is looking at a piece of text and which features are firing where and ordering of those. Only other thing I would look at is if you look at the activations, it's pretty clear they, the dictionaries here are decently sparse at the top here. There's a couple features that are active in the sets for each one of these. So awesome work in kind of looking and interpreting what these dictionary features mean and visualizing them. There's a set of investigations they do into like these activations and like what these features are, and like and then really ensuring that they probabilistically mean the thing that they're kind of indicating they do mean. One thing I thought was interesting too here is this section where you have this polysemanticity, where if every feature, if it was truly polysemantic and you had this lots of things overlapping and meaning different things, it's kind of hard to interpret. But if you do have these like when it's a small number of features, maybe it's not just one activation, but it's a small number, you could still get this you can still have these you can kind of have this I don't know if it kind of totally rules out the polysemanticity. It kind of goes against a little bit of the polysemanticity. I mean, it's not just neurons mean many things. It's they all work together. It's just the way, just when you look at one at a time in isolation, it can feel like it means a lot of things. But if you look at the vectors as a whole and you map them to the right spaces, it's not that they're this crazy policy. It's not that they're meaning 15,000 things at once. It's that you're just kind of zoomed in too tight. You need to look at the whole thing. They might mean a handful of things, but you just got to look at them as one thing working together. Was kind of my take on this, that it's a kind of an argument that that there's meaningful ways in which you can look at the activations as a whole. And then I thought, yeah, I thought this section was a pretty good section around kind of going through like just kind of proving out does this feature really mean Arabic's script feature? I think they came up with a way of detecting Arabic script through like a a text-based approach, and then compared it to the probability of it really being Arabic script versus this feature actually detecting it as Arabic script, just to go prove that it's actually is detecting the thing you think it is, and having some really good evidence around that. Proxyism, it's not perfect. These aren't like perfect encoders of the ideas which we all think we have in our heads, but they're good. They're good overlaps with them, and they might be slightly different than the ones we have. Feature, there's some points in this section around like, is it really learning something in the data, or is it actually using these features to improve, to do the prediction, which was the transformer was trained for? So is it causal, or is it causing something downstream to actually happen? Is it causing the model to be better at predicting the next token for Arabic script, versus is it just learning something in the data? They kind of go and prove that it's actually doing something downstream. It really is actually helping predict Arabic script when it or helping drive the model towards improving loss on Arabic script versus like token prediction. They do some feature appellations. They go through and try to show that it really is that the feature is a collection of neurons working together, not an individual neuron.
Wait, Jason, do you want to linger on the one just above that? I think that's like the
Yeah.
most powerful. Right, the one right before that, right after. Sorry, right after.
This one here.
Yeah, like this one, they took the neuron that fires in the highest correlation with the Arabic feature, and you see like it's like dominantly blue, which is things that the neuron typically fires with even more intensity, with magnitudes of more frequency on things that are not Arabic. And the things that are Arabic is just that tiny, you might not even see it in the screen, that tiny red section. And so again, you take a neuron that fires with highest correlation with the feature, and you show that it actually just fires more intensely for everyone else. Just great demonstration about like the polysemanticity of neurons.
Yeah. Well, any more questions or thoughts from the group? Universality. I think this is interesting. I think this is one of the more interesting questions. The I mean, like my inclination of what I've read and seen so far, and kind of what I've kind of experienced in kind of looking at, I would say a lot of UMAPs of transformer outputs, of transformer internals. I think there's something to be said for this. Like I think there's a whole field around this, and uh, it's a really interesting question. Does the relationships between objects and ideas form similar topological structures in totally differently trained models? Is there something naturally inherent in a model or an idea that represents structure, and that same structure is learned and can be pulled out? It's pulled out differently. Totally different transformers or LLMs trained on, maybe even different data sets would learn the same ideas, the same call it basis functions, the same topological structures. So this one, I expect a lot of research in this area. I'm fascinated to understand if it really is true and what the I expect a good set of papers eventually in this area. Yeah, and they just go through different features here. They dig through the DNA feature we went through, the Arabic feature we went through, and just again prove those same points. Those down, it detects what it's trying to detect. It's actually being used downstream by it. It's not an individual neuron. It's multiple working together. And
Jason, what do you think? What's your question for you? Like when I first saw this paper, I think one of the main authors tweeted it out, and like the claim was, well, now the mechanistic interpretability of these models in general is now like a computation problem. Like, oh, now we just got to figure out how to like train these sparse autoencoders, to the actual size of these transformers that we're using today. Like, to what extent do you think that's a true statement, or do you think that they're overplaying their hand a little bit in this paper? Or just wondering if you have any rough thoughts on that.
yeah, I mean, it's definitely not a solved, definitely not a solved field. But uh, I think it still feels to me, or I don't know, I mean, this is a well done, well researched paper. Still feels early in the interpretability space. Again, like I do think the ideas of, okay, this is Arabic, this is not Arabic, like those type of dimensions are fascinating. But like think of like code generation for an LLM, and it messes up something like what you'd like to get to is something from an interpretability perspective that would help you understand, like, what should I go do? Where's it breaking down? Where like, and so you might be able to detect an activation, but like, how does that represent like a missed bracket or like something on that? Like how do the different like generations of an LLM connect to each other, and how do how do these things, how does there's outer ideas, I might be writing a piece of code that does something, and there's inner ideas, there's a whole loop, an inner loop, and how do those, like, this is so early, like we're kind of in the earliest stage. And yeah, so and trying to understand kind of many levels here to understand this well enough to go make a fix or change or do something where we still feel kind of far from that. Next question is, how many vectors are required to either capture all of human knowledge or at least the domain that is of interest to your problem?
Beautiful question.
Yeah, that's a big one. Yeah, that's a big one. I kind of feel like yeah, I don't know if I can take a stab
Well,
at that, but
I mean, I forgot who I was joking with, but it was like, okay, maybe if they tried to autocode with like two, the only thing you get is like good and evil, or something from this thing. But I think my intuition is not much, actually, because the authors, when they, if you think about 512, I think maybe humans overestimate how rich our language and our lives are. But within these 512 features, they found features that detect like the numerical digits in base 64 encoding. Like, surely that's not, out of the sum total of things that are important to humans, like that doesn't seem like that important to be there. So like my sense is it's not much. It's yeah.
yeah. So one question Vibu asked was like, what do we think the next area of research or areas that I like to see? I think there's a really, one thing that there's a common thing I've been seeing and across, there's a set of papers that I think would be fascinating and interesting, is like, is can you the idea we were talking about earlier, which is there a universality to the topological structures that these models learn? So could I can I say, and this would be for like protection, like ideas around negative subjects or harmful subjects or toxicity or whatever, like can you just know those by the structures inherent in basically these dictionaries are pulling out, but it could just also be a structural stuff. So I think the universality one is a really interesting one. And can you just look at the topologies that come out based upon the data you put in and understand exactly what this object is. Oh, this is a car based upon the structures, or this is a wheel because it's related to a car, it's related to black. So I think there's a whole thing around universality that I think is a fascinating area of like, do models learn the same structures totally independent on different data? So that's kind of one area that's fascinating. And then what does that mean? Well, I think it comes down to like, if you want to control outputs or control things in different ways, you can easily, be easy to do. I think there's I think there's a wealth of like, how do you use this to go fix or improve stuff? I think that's still like like a massively open question. Like when there's just so many simple mistakes that LMs make. Is there any way of using these fields to improve or fix or understand those problems better? And so kind of those are at least two I would kind of love directions I'd love to see that I think are interesting. A good question. And
If there's anything I know about engineers, I feel like the more plausible way is they'll find that, oh, if you stimulate this particular feature, you can coerce the text to be Arabic or HTML. So if like the code doesn't come out right, you'll just like increase the value of that feature activation. It'd be more likely HTML, and that's the next best thing you got.
yeah, I mean, I think there's a whole, I mean, there's been work on steering vectors that have come out in different areas. So I think there's whole ways in which you can use these activations to steer models. Maybe do it in a way that doesn't fill up the context window or something. But there's probably a lot of ways to leverage this that's going to be very interesting in the future. Yeah, so Vibu said that yeah, there's a whole area of research is going on around pruning unsafe generations and stuff. Also interested in the training fine-tuning aspect too. Yeah, so check out some of the stuff Vibu shared there. It's pretty good. Yeah, so those are, yeah, I think this is kind of the stuff we wanted to go through here. Awesome work by this group here. I mean, just amazing work. There's someone on Twitter, I don't have a link of it, but someone on Twitter recreated this on Llama recently. So if anyone, I was trying to find it. I saw it like last week. But I can I didn't have the link, but if someone has that, if drop it in the chat or share it around, share it to us, we'll share it, share it in the community. That it was pretty awesome work to recreate this work on kind of some open models. I don't know who did it, but I kind of saw it and was impressed with the rigor. Cool. Well, thank you everyone for kind of joining, and appreciate the time.
Hi.